All right, let's talk about something serious. Dating apps. They're everywhere, right? For so many of us, they're how we look for love. But what happens when that search for connection takes a really dark turn? We're talking about deception, real danger, and stories that are just pure horror.
And look, the scale of this problem, it's just staggering. A study from the Australian Institute of Criminology found that almost 3 out of every 4 people on dating apps, that's 74%, have dealt with some kind of online or even in-person sexual violence. I mean, let that sink in for a second. That number is so high, it's almost hard to believe.
And you have to remember, behind a statistic like that are real people, real devastating stories. This quote from a victim, it just cuts right through everything. We're not talking about awkward dates or getting ghosted here. We're talking about life-changing trauma, where something that's supposed to bring people together becomes a weapon. So you gotta ask, how did we even get to this point? Well, if you think about it, the very way these apps are designed, the anonymity, how easy they are to use, the millions and millions of people on them, it's accidentally created the perfect hunting ground for predators. And a huge piece of this puzzle is the massive gap between what you see on the screen and who the person actually is. It's so easy for someone to build this perfect online persona, right? They seem charming, funny, trustworthy, literally your perfect match. But behind that profile, it could be someone completely different, someone manipulative or even dangerous. And we've all heard of the most basic version of this, right? Catfishing. This quote kind of nails that feeling of being tricked. It's that feeling of being swindled, like you bought into a lie. But using old photos, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes the deception goes way, way deeper. Yeah, we are not just talking about someone using a picture from 10 years ago when they had more hair. No, some of these predators go all out. They build these incredibly detailed, elaborate fantasy worlds, all designed for one purpose, to lure you into their web. Okay, so take the case of a guy named Roberto Bello. They called him Roby. This guy's story is wild. He told women he was the heir to this huge fortune. He'd fake connections to celebrities to make himself seem legit. And here's the really sick part. He used photos of his own kids to look like a safe, trustworthy family guy. All the while, he's just bombarding his victims with texts and calls 24/7, cutting them off from everyone else. But it's not always about money. Sometimes the deception, that perfect profile, it's just a mask. It's bait for a physical trap, designed to get someone alone and vulnerable. So how does this actually play out? Let's look at one guy's story, Ryan. It starts like any other match, right? Inviting profile, good conversation. She suggests meeting at a bar. Sounds safe, it's public. But when Ryan gets there, surprise, it's closed. So she suggests another spot and tells him to take a shortcut through this dark, unlit park. And that's where he's pretty sure an ambush was waiting for him. And this quote, it just captures that horrible, sinking feeling. For Ryan, that moment came when he saw his match had blocked him on the app. For other people, it's a sudden shift in behavior, or when other people suddenly show up. It's that gut punch moment you realize none of this was an accident. You were led here on purpose. And what happens in these traps can be anything. One guy was lured to a house only to be ambushed by a masked man with a knife. Another story, a woman gets driven to some remote bar, and when she turns the guy down, he just leaves her. Stranded on a dark road, middle of nowhere, no phone signal, just gone. But the scary part isn't always just what happens on the date. Sometimes the real danger is when it follows you home. Check out this timeline. It starts with just one awkward date with a guy named Chris. But it didn't stop there. First, she starts seeing his car parked near her job. Then, after she blocks his number, he starts obsessively trying to add her on every social media platform. It just keeps escalating until it ends in a horrifying physical assault. And here's something truly terrifying. You don't even have to match with them. One woman kept seeing this guy Joe on her app. She always swiped left, not interested. But somehow, he found out where she lived, started stalking her. He even climbed up to her second-floor window. Think about that. It really makes you wonder, right? What do you do when the danger actually follows you home? When it's not just one bad night, but this constant fear that's now a part of your everyday life? That psychological damage, it can be just as bad, if not worse, than any physical attack. So when they follow you home, what happens then? The aftermath of these things.
The fear, the paranoia, the blaming yourself, that stuff can stick with a person for years. It's a huge societal problem that, honestly, we're just starting to figure out how to even talk about. A forensic specialist really broke down this emotional trap victims fall into. There's this extra layer of shame. You end up blaming yourself for trusting them. How do you reconcile that charming, funny person from the app with the person who hurt you? It's an impossible mental conflict. And that shame, that self-blame, it's a huge reason why so many of these crimes go unreported. Victims feel like they were somehow part of the problem. They think, well, I'm the one who swiped right, or I agreed to meet them. And that guilt, which is completely misplaced, is exactly what lets these predators stay on the apps and just move on to the next person. Okay, so with all this out there, how do you even begin to stay safe? Look, the apps definitely have a role to play, for sure. But the most powerful advice, coming straight from people who've lived through this, all comes down to one thing: trusting your gut. And if you look back at these stories, the red flags are there. Someone pushing really hard to meet somewhere private or super remote, especially for a first date, that's a red flag. Their stories don't add up? Red flag. They refuse to do a quick video call just to prove they are who they say they are? Huge red flag. And of course, if their messages are getting way too aggressive or obsessive, that's a sign to get out of there. And this quote from someone who got away really says it all. That little voice in your head, that feeling that something just isn't right, that's your brain's alarm system. And the one thing every survivor says is, never, ever ignore that feeling. Which really leaves us with this final question to think about. With just one click, a total stranger can be in your bedroom, so to speak. Our front door is now digital. In a world like that, how do we even begin to stay safe?